Lesson 25 is about two-way frequency tables, and in 25.1, we're going to create a two-way frequency table. So example 1 says a survey asks 48 students if they prefer math or science, and if they prefer working individually on their schoolwork or in groups. Of the 20 students who said they prefer math, 16 of them prefer working individually. Also, if of the 24 students who prefer group work, 20 of them said they prefer science. So we're going to create a two-way frequency table using this information. A two-way frequency table is just kind of like a display that compares kind of like two different sets of data, I guess. So like in this survey, it asked students if they prefer math or science. So that was one of the choices. So in our like top row, we're going to label it with either preferring math or preferring science. And then the other choice that students had to make was whether they prefer working individually on their work or in groups. So on the like left column, that was separated into prefer working individually or in groups. When you are setting up a two-way frequency table, if you have to set it up from scratch, it doesn't matter which way you label the top row versus the far left column. So what I mean by that is I could have put math or science like on the left side right here and put working individually or working groups across the top. There's no like kind of difference that makes. However, you do want to keep like math and science together and like working individually versus group work together on the same side, because it's almost like, you know, students are taking a survey and it's like they have to pick math or science, so those are together, and then pick individually or groups, so those are together. So just a little bit as far as like the initial setup of a table. And then now we can begin to take like kind of the different pieces of information that they give us from that top paragraph and start to fill in our table. So it says a survey asked 48 students if they prefer math or science. So that's the total amount of students that they asked was 48. And the total amount that they asked, that always goes in that lower right corner. So we'll put a 48 down there. And then starting in the like second sentence, it says of the 20 students who said they prefer math. So before I even finish that sentence, it says 20 students said they prefer math. So we're going to go to the total under prefers math. So that's right there. So the prefers math column, and then the bottom, that's the total of students who said they prefer math. So in this case, 20 students said they prefer math. And then of the 20 students who said they prefer math, it says 16 of them prefer working individually. So then now we'll go to where preferring math and working individually overlap. So that's right here. So prefer math column and prefer working individually row overlaps right there. There was 16 that said they preferred math and working individually. So we'll put 16 right there. And then the next sentence, it says also of the 24 students who prefer group work. So 24 total students prefer group work. So in the total section of the group work row, which is right here, I'm going to put 24. And then of those 24 students who prefer group work, 20 of them prefer science. So I'm going to go to where preferring group work and preferring science overlaps, which is right here. And I'm going to put in a 20. So 20 students prefer group work of the 24 students who prefer group work, 20 of them prefer science. So we're preferring science and group work overlap. We put a 20 in there. And then I know our table's not completely filled in, but that's all the information that we pulled from our like initial paragraph. So now we kind of like put the rest of the table almost like a puzzle or like Sudoku kind of. I guess it's not really like Sudoku, but it reminds me of it. So we have enough information to go ahead and fill in our table. So it doesn't really matter necessarily where you start. But we're going to do kind of like a lot of, I guess, subtracting to get our missing pieces. So I'm going to focus in on the preferring math column first. So it says that there's 20 total students who prefer math. And then of those 20 students, 16 prefer group work, 16 to prefer to work individually. And we are missing how many prefer group work. So to find how many prefer group work, we could take this 20 total students who prefer math and then subtract the 16 who prefer to work individually. And 20 minus 16 will give us 4 students who prefer math and group work. And then you should just always double check that the total like section is the total for that column or that row, whatever you're working on. So what I mean by that is like 16 plus 4 is 20. So those add up. And then for, let's see, we can do the total of students who prefer to work individually, because we know the total of all students asked, that was 48. And then we can subtract the total students who preferred group work, which was 24. So I'm taking 48, the total of all students, subtracting 24, the total who said they like to, or they preferred group work, to get the total of students who prefer to work individually. So 48 minus 24 is 24. So this will be 24 right here. And then we filled in a column, so we should just kind of double check to make sure that it adds up correctly. So that means that we just double check like 24 plus 24 is 48. So that works. And then we can fill in our like preferred science those missing sections now. So for students who preferred science but also preferred working individually, to find that missing section, we can take the total students who preferred working individually and subtract the ones who preferred working individually and preferred math. So we'll do 24 minus 16. 24 minus 16 is 8. So this would be an 8 right here. And then just double check, make sure it adds up correctly. So like 16 plus 8, there's 16 students who prefer math and working individually and 8 students who prefer science and working individually. And altogether, that ends up being 24 students who prefer working individually. And then the last one that we need to fill in, we can use subtraction if we want, or we can just go ahead and add this column. So we can do like 8 plus 24 to get the total amount, or sorry, 8 plus 20, excuse me, to get the total that prefer science, because there's 8 that preferred science and preferred working individually, 20 that preferred science and preferred group work. So 8 plus 20 gives us 28. So we'll do 20 plus 8 equals 28 total students who prefer science. So as you can kind of tell as we're going through that, there's not just one way to go about filling in your table. Like I said before, it's almost kind of like a puzzle, like a fill in the blank type of puzzle. And then you should always take a second to just double check your table to make sure that all of your like rows and columns add up properly to the total portion of that row or column. So like do check 16 plus 8, that's 24, that's good. 4 plus 20 is 24, so that's good. And then 20 plus 28 is 48, so that's good. And then we can double check the columns as well. So 16 plus 4 is 20, 8 plus 20 is 28, and then 24 plus 24 is 48. So the total row and total column are just kind of a nice way to double check your work before moving on. So 25.2 is called calculations from two-way frequency tables. So what we did up here is we just created a two-way frequency table. And then this next section, we're going to create what's called a two-way relative frequency table, which I know sounds almost identical. But the difference is when a two-way table displays percentages or ratios instead of just frequency counts like we had up here, the table is referred to as a two-way relative frequency table. So it sounds almost the same, just has this word relative thrown in there. What that means is it's percentages relative to the overall total. So example 1, convert the following table into a two-way relative frequency table. So we have just a regular two-way table right here. We're going to convert it into a two-way relative frequency table over here. So what we have to do in order to convert them is we have to take all of the original values or frequency values inside the table and just put them over the overall total. So our overall total for this survey, it looks like a survey was asking men and women whether they prefer yoga or running. We have to take all of those values and put them over 240. So for men who prefer yoga, it was 21. So it would be 21 over 240. And then I'm not going to convert them to percentages or decimals right now, but I will at the very end after we fill in like kind of all of our ratios of our table. So that was men who prefer yoga. For women who prefer yoga, it's 135. So we'll put 135 over the total amount of people asked, which was 240. It's always going to be over 240 because that was the total amount of people in that survey. And then for the total amount of people who prefer yoga, it was 156. So 156. And then over 240. So we're done with the total people that prefer yoga. For men who prefer running, it was 39. So 39 over 240. And then for women who prefer running, it was 45 over 240. And then the total amount of people who preferred running, it was 84 over 240. And then we can move on to that last column, which is the total of like men and women. So for men, the total was 60 people, or 60 men were asked. So 60 over 240. And then women, 180 total women were asked. So 180 over 240. And then for the like last box, it's the total. So it's just 240 out of 240. And that should always be 100% because it's the like total out of the like total amount of people that were asked. So 240 out of 240 was 100%. So I'm going to pull up a calculator so we can get a decimal or a percent for each of these now. So to change from these fractions to percentages, you take the numerator, that's the number on the top of the fraction, and you divide it by the denominator, that's the number on bottom. So I'm going to start in the upper left corner with the men who prefer yoga. So I'll do 21 and then divided by 240. So that ends up being 0. I'm actually make this a little smaller so I can write it as a percent as well. So it ends up being 0.0875. And then if I need to put that as a percentage, I would move the decimal place twice to the right, or you multiply the decimal by 100 and that'll give you it as a percent. So if I move the decimal place twice to the right, it ends up being 8.75%. So that's the percent of people asked that happen to be men that liked yoga. And then I'm going to keep going with females who preferred yoga. So that was 135 divided by 240, which is 0.5625. If I move the decimal place twice to the right to convert that to a percent, it would be 56.25%. And then for the total amount of people who preferred yoga, it was 156 out of 240, which is 0.65. Or if I move the decimal place twice to the right, it'd be 65%. So 65% of all the people who asked prefer yoga. And then for males who preferred running, it's 39 out of 240. So that ends up being 0.1625. To convert to a percent, I move the decimal place twice to the right. And then that ends up being 16.25%. And then for females who preferred running, it's 45 out of 240, which is 18.75. Sorry, I like kind of converted it to a percent in my head, but it ends up being 0.1875. And then if we convert it to a percent, we move the decimal place twice to the right. So it ends up being 18.75%. And then for total amount of people that preferred running, it was 84 out of 240, which is 0.35. So 0.35 or 35%. And then now we just need the totals of the male and the female rows. So for total on the male row, it was 60 out of 240, which is 0.25 or 25%. And then for total on the female row, it was 180 out of 240, which was 0.75 or 75%. So this is a good time to kind of stop and check your work. Definitely check, especially with like the total row and the total column, because that's like pretty quick to check. So this is 65% total and 35% total. So when we combine those, we should have 100%. So like double check 65 plus 35 is 100. 65 plus 35 is 100. So that's good. And then over here, 75 and 25, those add up to 100 as well. So if you ever end up that like maybe they didn't add up to 100, then that would mean that there's some sort of little mistake in there. So you'd want to go back and find it. So two-way relative frequency tables, what this is, come in handy when you want to find quick probabilities. So if I asked you like what percentage of the people surveyed, or what is the odds that somebody asked was a male who preferred yoga, you would just go to where male and yoga overlapped, and it would be 8.75%. Or what was the percentage of people in the survey that were females? You would go to the total of the female row, which was 75%. So it just gives you those like percentages and probabilities much quicker than if you had to go and find them manually from the original two-way frequency table, which you could. But again, like kind of the word here is like it's quicker. You can just look at the two-way relative frequency tables and find those percentages right away, versus if you just started with a regular two-way table like we have over here, you'd have to find them manually. Okay, so example 2, analyze the table and answer the following questions. So we have a table that was, or it's representing students who were surveyed and asked about which of the 3 careers they would prefer, or they like are their dream jobs for when they get older. So we have boys and girls that were asked. We have president, astronaut, and business owners. So first question is, what % of students surveyed want to become president? So it's asking just all the students. So what % of the students want to become president? So we take all that said president. So I'll explain what that means in a second if that's a little confusing. So all the students that said president over all the students total. So for all the students who said president, you look for like the total portion of people who said president. So president's right here, total's at the bottom of that. And then for all the students total, that's the like total is always in the bottom right corner. So that would be that 114. So for everyone who said president, that was 41. And then over everyone or all students that were surveyed is 114. And then if I want to find the %, I do 41 divided by 114. Which is, I'm going to have to round this. So I'm going to change this to like the squiggly equals because that means approximately. So this was approximately 0.3596. And then if I want to convert that to a decimal or a %, excuse me, I move the decimal place twice to the right. I'm just going to round this up to the nearest whole %, so that it would be like 35.96%. But if I round to the nearest whole number, it would be 36%. So approximately 36% of students want to become president. Okay, and then for the next question, it says, what % of girls surveyed want to become an astronaut? So this, in this case, it's not asking like all students. It's just asking about girls only. And then it's asking which ones want to become astronauts. So for our numerator, it's going to be not all. It's going to be the girls that said astronaut. Just going to shorten it to that. And then it's only out of the girls total. Because again, it's just saying like what % of girls. So we don't care at all about like what the boys said in this case. We're just looking out of the girls. So for girls who said astronaut, we look at where girls and astronaut overlaps, which is right here. And there's 20 girls that said astronaut. And then we're looking at just out of all the girls total. So this time not out of all the students, which was 114. We have to look at just the total amount of girls, which was 53. So it'd be 20 out of 53. So we do, to convert it to a percent, we do 20 out of 50, or 20 divided by 53, which is approximately 0.377. And then if I want to convert that to a percent, I'm going to move the decimal place twice to the right. And then I'm just going to round this up to the nearest whole percent. So it would be like 37.7%. But if I do the nearest whole number, that would round up to a 38%. So approximately 38% of the girls surveyed want to become an astronaut.